it is. All right, hi. We're going to talk about skarns today. I'm going to say right off the bat I am not an expert on skarn, but I'm going to show you quite a bit of skarn mineralogy today, and I think an overall statement to make is that we can make skarns as easy or as complicated as we want. We all know that there's an extreme amount of mineralogy in skarns, a lot of different mineral species. However, ultimately, there is also some very simple relationships in skarns as well. And so what I'm going to be showing you today is going from the simple, straightforward, I want to say simple, but straightforward part of skarn identification and logging, i.e. just the basic identification of minerals. And then I'm gonna take you down kind of into the weeds and show you some of the more complex things that can be brought out of skarn using hyperspectral. And then we'll zoom all the way back out to deposit scales. And I'll show you what skarns look like on a much bigger scale. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. I'm going to show you one from Mexico. I'm going to show you one from Australia. I'm going to sneak in a few from Arizona, which I didn't put in the title. And then I'll end with a few images from Peru, from a new project in Peru. All right. So I wanted to go all the way back to Gilbert and Park, 1985, ore deposits, and a statement in there, in general, skarn minerals are conspicuous and diagnostic, meaning they're really easy to detect. So in other words, if you can't tell the difference between an epidote and a chloride in hand sample, you might have a problem. So I'm not trying to tell you that I can do something that a human can't do here. What I'm going to be showing you is that we can do the same detections that a human is capable of, but then being able to automate that and make it more consistent, as well as being able to identify some of these conspicuous and diagnostic minerals, like epidote, but to be able to do it at very fine scales and very fine-grained material. So skarn mineralogy really depends on a couple of things. It depends on the character of the invaded rock. So in other words, whether you have limestone, a dolostone, a volcanic, a sedimentary rock. So it depends on what's there to start with, of course. It also depends on the composition of the solution that's coming through the rock. So is it very acidic? Is it basic? What kind of other elements is it carrying? So it really depends on the composition of the fluid. And then, of course, it depends on the pressure and temperature of what you're dealing with. So how hot the water is, in other words, and in what environment. And as I'm going through here, you'll see that I've got an image up here of a piece of core, and as I go through, you're going to see some of the minerals coming into the side. So this first one we've got here is calcite. So this is the basic protolith here of this particular one that I'm showing. So the formation of skarns themselves involve the replacement or the alteration of the country rock, or again, the limestone or the dolostone or whatever it is that it's invading. And this is exemplified, I'm going to say some very general statements here. Skarns can be really different from one another, but in general, we see an expanding front initially with heat of anhydrous minerals. So this is where the garnets and the pyroxenes come in. And then, after that, we see as the temperatures fall, or sometimes they continue to go up and then come back down, we'll see things like wollastonite come in, and then the hydrous minerals start to come in. And that's when you get the retrograde mineralization and the overprints. And so that's when you start seeing amphiboles, epidotes, micas, clays, zeolites, and then, of course, most importantly, the sulfides start to come in. And that's when we start to get our ore mineralization. So, of course, while we go looking for garnets and pyroxenes to find skarns, in fact, a lot of the mineralization is coming in with the more difficult minerals to identify, the clays, the zeolites, and I'm going to show you quite a few examples of zeolites that I think are underestimated pretty heavily in skarn exploration. And there in the background, you can see some of these hydrous minerals, the amphibole, chlorite, white mica, and then sauconite, which if you're not familiar with that is a zinc smectite. And then so finally we get a whole image here, and what I'm showing you here on the right is a list of minerals in one of the gold skarns I'm going to show you. This particular skarn, I'm not showing all of them, has about 42 different minerals that have come out in this skarn. That's fairly typical. In a given porphyry or an epithermal deposit that we might scan with hyperspectral imaging, we may get somewhere between 15 and 20 minerals. Skarns can have 40, 50, sometimes 60 minerals coming out of them, which probably doesn't surprise any of the geologists in the room. So if we're able to characterize this diverse mineralogy, we can ultimately use it to vector towards our higher grade gold, copper, zinc, whatever it is that we're looking for. Okay, so this is a lot of words. I promise this is the most word slide in the entire talk. What can we do with hyperspectral imaging in order to get at better exploration and success and discovery of skarns? So of course we can do basic detection and mapping, both the host rock and the skarn minerals, as I've just shown you, including solid solution series. So I can tell you whether or not you have, the chemistry of your carbonates, for instance, whether you have a calcite or whether you have a dolomite or whether you have a siderite. So I can tell you chemistries of various minerals. Of course, we can do some sulfide detection, which I'll talk about sort of in the middle of the talk. We can then do assemblage identification. That was the title of the talk, prograde versus retrograde. So we can figure out where we are in the skarn. We can also use minerals as vectors themselves. And I will show you a couple of examples, though as geologists we sort of shy from this, but there are a couple of minerals out there in a few of the skarns I'm going to show you where it's one or maybe two minerals which are very nice gold or copper vectors or zinc vectors. So there is the ability to do that. Usually, though, it's a collection of minerals. It's 4 or 5 different minerals that are pointing, that are serving as a vector. And of course, the identification of these minerals fundamentally tells us about something about not only the source, the rock that's being invaded, if you will, but also the chemistry of the fluids, which then is going to tell us a lot about the sulfide formation and what we can expect trying to extract. And then finally, we can use this in order to actually look at the spatial extent. There's a general rule of thumb, of course, in all of ore deposit geology that the larger your alteration halos in general, the more mineralization you're going to have. And so if we can do a much better job of estimating the size of skarns, we can give a fairly good idea, a relative idea of how big this skarn might be and how much mineral we might be able to get at. And then here at the end, which I won't have any time to talk about today, but all of this can be pulled into big geomap models to clarify more of that information. So what I'm showing here on the right is a big list of minerals. I don't expect you to be able to read any of this, but this is out of Meinert's 92 paper. This is just a list of all of the minerals. And what I wanted to emphasize here is that we're telling you again, not only whether we have hydrous or non-hydrous minerals, but more importantly, it tells us something about the fluids again, as I was mentioning, and so here I've just highlighted, we can basically watch elements going in and out of minerals. So we can watch calcium and iron and magnesium coming in and out by the identification of the minerals themselves. So it's a proxy for looking at the geochemistry of the fluids involved. The other half of this is that this isn't just point imaging. This is a full image. So we're actually able to see textures. So this allows us to say, not only do I have garnet, or that I have Vesuvianite, or that I have Montmorillonite, but I can tell you whether it's pervasive through the core, whether it's in veins, whether it's in masses. So I can tell you how it's actually put out there. But most importantly, I can derive some pretty nice paragenetic sequences from this type of data by using cross-cutting relationships, overprints, looking at replacement textures. We can actually start to derive a really nice sequence, which again helps us understand where we are in the skarn and where mineralization is going to be. As I just said, we can do recrystallization, replacements, overprints, supergene. I'm going to show you a gold skarn that has for many years been thought to have a lot of supergene alteration because of where it is. By looking at the textures in the hyperspectral data, I think it's pretty clear it's not supergene. It's actually primary hydrothermal deposition. So here are the two different skarns I'm mainly going to show. So I'm going to show you a zinc skarn, and I'm going to show you gold skarn. And the gold skarn is primarily hosted in limestones and volcanics. There's also a big fault that kind of cuts through there, which is concentrating a lot of the skarn mineralization. And then the zinc skarn is quite proximal to a big copper porphyry. So different, and you can see some differences here, but we'll talk about the varying mineralogies that we've seen between the two. There's a lot of overlap, but depending on the host rock, which in the case of the zinc skarn has a lot more dolomite, you're going to see a lot more magnesium minerals coming out versus the more iron-rich minerals that we see in the gold skarn. So if I were to try to create just one diagram of a skarn, it's too difficult to do, so I'm doing a really, not childish, but very simple idea of a skarn here, because there are so many different kinds and so many ways that we can look at skarn. But in general, what I'm trying to get across here is simply that we have this background limestone or dolomite or whatever it happens to be. We have an intrusive that comes in, it heats up the rock, and we start formation, initially just metamorphism, marbleization, for instance, of the limestones, and then low temperature metamorphism, converting the background protolith rock into various minerals. Again, as I said initially, we have the anhydrous, so we get formation of the classic skarn minerals, the garnets, the green garnets, the andradite, the grossular, and then into the green pyroxenes that you see, the hedenbergite, vesuvianite, those prograde minerals. And then as it comes out and then it starts to come back in, as it starts to cool, we get retrograde minerals. And so that's where you start to then get the hydrous, so the amphiboles, chlorites, serpentines, clays, zeolites, etc. So this is just a general diagram here. And I put this in here just to remind myself to point out that the couple of skarns I'm going to show you, we have about, for each of these skarns, we have about 1.5 billion spectral signatures for each one. So we have 1.5 billion alteration points. So that's what's going into these models that I'm going to show you. So this is how the data was collected. It was collected with the Corescan hyperspectral core logging system. It's a mobile unit. These are some of its specifications. I think I've shown this to enough people. I won't go into it too much, but we're doing 450 to 2500 nanometers in 4 nanometer bands. And importantly, our spatial resolution for the pixels are 500 micron. So that's the detection, so that's the size of the pixel that we're doing the detection of the minerals with. So now the next several slides I'm going to show you, I'm just going to go through a few examples of the direct detection of various typical skarn minerals. So first we'll start with the prograde as well as the protolith. So we'll look at some of the typical mineralogy here. You of course have the garnets, grossular, andradite, and this isn't supposed to be a comprehensive list. This is just an example of some of the ones that we see here. And over here on the right, you'll see some examples here. And this is the gold skarn that I'm showing over here on the right. So you have garnets, you have some pyroxenes, magnetite can be a really nice vector, quartz feldspar, the carbonates, both primary protolith as well as you can get some prograde and hydrothermal formation of additional carbonates. You also get, at the end, retrograde iron carbonates are quite common in skarns and can be a really nice vector. Epidotes, of course, and then sometimes you can actually get a little prograde amphibole as well. And I wanted to point out here that often there are many researchers who define skarn by the relative amount of garnet versus pyroxene. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that as well. But here, you're actually seeing we're more proximal to the intrusive here because we have a way more garnet, and then we have far less hedenbergite. So we're a little bit more proximal, so that's going to be a nice vector to show you where you are in the skarn. So I'll just go through a few here. If you want to see more, you can come to the booth after or talk to me. I don't have time to go through everyone in great detail. But I'll show you a few examples here. Here's some grossular, and every time I show you one of these, I'm going to show you a photo, the classification map, which shows you all the minerals, which are defined down here at the bottom. And then this is what we call a match image. So this is just grossular. And it's a match from 92% to 100% match to a library spectrum of grossular. The library spectrum is from the USGS. So what you're showing here is that where it's black, there is no detected grossular at a 92% confidence. So anything, it's 92% above match to a library spectrum. Okay, so now I'm just going to go through them a little bit fast here. So here's grossular, here's the pyroxene coming in, this iron-rich Hedenbergite. You can see it's very pervasive, as we would expect it to be. You can see a little bit of garnet coming in here, down here too, so you have that nice assemblage. Here's Vesuvianite, very complicated silicate, pretty common in prograde assemblages. This is its spectral signature here. Wollastonite, which is a calcium silicate. Wollastonite often forms right before you start to go back into the retrograde, as you see that. So it can be a really nice benchmarker. It is common to see it in veins like this, but it can also be pervasive. And then, now we'll get into the retrograde, and this is a really beautiful example where you see the original primary carbonate in the lighter cyan color here, and then you can see the retrograde iron carbonate veins coming through here, which is really beautiful. And so here's the iron carbonate here on the right. And so I put that there because it has both pro and retrograde. But now we can look at some of the typical retrograde minerals. So this is a long list. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we have amphibole, talc, epidote, chloride, biotite. You have the white micas here. Including, and we can tell, of course, the chemistries of these white micas, and it turns out, interestingly, which I think is something that's understudied in skarn, that white mica has some really nice vectors for skarn mineralization in it, and I just think they haven't been as recognized because it's very difficult to log fine-grained white micas. There's also some interesting minerals like apophyllite, some of the scapolites, zeolites, prenites, serpentine, hydrosilicas are pretty common as well. I think that's also been underreported. And then finally the clays. And some of these clays can be really nice vectors because they can concentrate. For instance, the sauconite has this zinc concentration, so they're really nice in zinc skarns. But things like nontronite works really well in a couple of the gold skarns we've looked at. It's been an iron-rich smectite. But it's also important to keep track of things like this because many of these are swelling. So it's going to be a problem later on in some of your mineral process. So here's some of the retrograde. I wanted to throw this in to show a little bit of the chemistry that we are capable of with this type of technology. So you have, here's the photo, and here's the amphibole, and then here's the wavelength of the amphibole. And what you're looking at here is the difference between a tremolite and actinolite. So where it's red in this AM wave, the amphibole wavelength, you're actually trending more towards the actinolite species, which is more iron-rich. And then as you're going into the blue colors, you're trending more into the tremolite. So we can actually then say something about the chemistry of the fluids as well. Talc, of course, beautiful, really easily to identify talc. Talc's one of those minerals we all like to keep track of because it can cause recovery issues, particularly if you're trying to pull moly out. Epidote, chlorite. So now we're getting into some of the micas. Very pervasive. Chlorite's a very common mineral we see in the retrograde sequences. We're also, of course, able to do things not just phengite, paragonite, but also things like ammoniated cericites come out. Here's one of these interesting scapolites. This is mariolite. Mariolite ends up being an excellent vector in iron skarn for gold. And then I wanted to put this one in because, again, zeolites, I think, are vastly underestimated because they're very difficult to log. They all look alike. Many of them look alike. They're fine grained. A lot of them are white. However, there are about 5 or 6 different zeolites that come out over and over in the skarns that we've looked at over the last several of years, and one of the most important ones is datolite. We see datolite predominantly in vein-like habits, although we have seen it pervasively. And I'll show you at the end of the talk some of the clustering work we've done where we're able to track the datolite with mineralization quite well. So you can see here some of the original. We started out with carbonate, we have the prograde, andradite garnet, the calcium iron garnet here, followed by the datolite coming in retrograde. And then finally, the clays. So here's saponite. Saponite is a magnesium-rich clay, a smectite. So you can see fairly pervasive here in this. This is the zinc skarn here. Here's some sauconite. This is the zinc smectite. And then, of course, good old kaolinite over here, which, again, I think has been interpreted by many people as being supergene or late. It's not always. Sometimes, because we can also detect crystallinity. And a lot of the kaolinite we see, particularly in gold skarns, is highly crystalline. So I question some of the lumping of all clays into this idea of supergene. Some of that is because a lot of the work that we've done in skarn has been in Australia, and Australia has deep weathering profiles, so they tend to call lots of things supergene in Australia. And then finally, actual sulfide detection. And this is a beautiful zinc skarn, and it has beautiful sphalerite in it. And you can see here the red color here is the sphalerite, and here's the sphalerite match image. This is the spectral signature here. So this is one of the sulfides that hyperspectral actually is fairly good at detecting and mapping. And I'll show you, we're going to zoom out a little bit and go up to borehole scale and actually look at mapping of sphalerite and what that might be able to tell us. Because most of this is probably what you thought I was going to talk about, is how we can use various mineral assemblages to vector towards skarn mineralization. But I'm going to start out by showing you actually just, let's map the sphalerite. Let's actually directly detect the main host of zinc in this deposit. So I'm going to zoom way out here now. So this is the zinc skarn. This is about 160 meters of core. These are basically core boxes stacked one on top of one another. And so this is depth is down. And now I'm showing you each identified mineral. And now you can see the typical skarn mineralogy is coming out. Here's the the amphiboles. There's the grossular garnet. You can see some of the clays coming in. So you can look at this and start to say, yeah, I can start to pick out some of these assemblages that I would expect for a skarn. And then here I plotted sphalerite. I know it's practically impossible to actually see where the sphalerite is coming out here. So I'm going to flip over to a different hole here, and we're going to look a little bit more clearly. And to help you out, I'm actually going to show the zinc assay, as well as I've got the copper assay over here too. So here's a different drill hole. This is 277 meters of core here. Here's the classification image of all the minerals. And then right here, you can just barely make out that sphalerite. And then over here, you can see, and I'm going to zoom in, don't worry, but I'm going to show you, we're going to zoom in and we're going to actually look here at the zinc assay. So we're going to zoom in right there, and now we're zoomed in. So here's the photography, the class map. We have montmorillonite here, iron carbonate, lamentite, so we have a different zeolite here, white mica, saponite, that's that magnesium clay. And now I want to focus your attention over here. So this pinkish color over here, this is their assay. And so this is their highest zinc values here. And what you see as you approach that is as we approach the high zinc zone, we have this saponite, which gives way to a smithsonite, which is the zinc carbonate. And then that heads over and quite a sharp boundary directly into the presence of sphalerite. And you can see it's a beautiful correlation between that and the actual zinc assay. So that's an example of actual, let's just detect the ore mineral itself. Now we can start to play the game, though, that we're not always going to be able to do that, and we can't detect all sulfides the same way as we can sphalerite. So now we can zoom back out and start looking at being able to identify assemblages in skarn. And so, for instance, here, again, this is a different drill hole here. This is the gold skarn. And now I'm showing you the various minerals across the top here, and we're going from the prograde into the retrograde. And I've put together just a quick and dirty sort of paragenesis here, where you have a primary carbonate, and this was done from the Corescan data. So we have the primary carbonate going into a collection of cerussite, chlorite, phlogopite, then to elastonite, then epidote, prehnite. Then we hit the skarn itself. So here, if you look at the Hedenbergite and the andradite, you can actually see where the skarn is here, which is right here. So then as we get into the skarn itself, we also have that plus the mariolite, that was the scapolite, prehnite, chlorite, phlogopite, iron carbonate, and a little bit of prehnite. And then finally, we also see it's important to state what you don't have. So in that skarn, what we absolutely don't have is any epidote, and very little willastonite, sericite, prehnite, carbonate. And so I'll zoom in right here. This is the actual skarn here. And so we're able to pull out a pretty nice paragenetic sequence just from looking at the Corescan data. I'll show you what the actual sequence is that's published on this particular skarn. And you can see that they have about 16 minerals here. Again, the number of minerals detected in this skarn by hyperspectral imaging is something around, it was 42 to 46 minerals. So we're able to detect a lot more minerals in this environment with hyperspectral imaging. We're able to detect most of the minerals that were identified previously, but of course we've added in a lot of that, not least of which is an increase in the number of clays and species of clays, the zeolites, which again I'm about to show you are really important for vectoring in this type of skarn. I'll show you one last interesting thing that can be done with this. So this is, again, a different drill hole. This is about 100 meters. This is in the gold skarn. And this line that you see right here is the actual skarn itself. So here you can see the grossular and the andradite and the Vesuvianite. So you've got your prograde right here. So here's your skarn. And then right on, if we look at just the sericite, so this is the white mica. If we look at the white mica, this that you see over here, and I'm going to zoom in on this, this is actually the crystallinity of the white mica. And the rule of thumb is that the higher the crystallinity, the higher the temperature of formation. And so if we zoom in on that, we can actually see that as we approach the skarn, so again, here's the beginning of the skarn. As we approach the skarn, the sericite is getting super crystalline. We're basically tracking the marbleization front at this point. So we can actually stick a finger on the beginning of that skarn and measure the total width of that skarn. And so this gives us a really quantitative way of measuring the exact spatial extent of these skarn bodies. Okay, so the final piece of this is now I'm going to put it into a model for you and show you what you can do. So you can take all of this spatial information I'm showing you and export it out to point data. So here's all the skarns, that's great, we can see it visually, but I'm actually going to export it out into point data. So I have a set downhole interval, and I export it out as a percentage. We're point counting. We're counting how many pixels around the surface of the core, and then we count how many are, in this case, what did I do? Chloride. So how many are chlorides? So I'm giving you a percentage chloride. We can then take that data, put it into various softwares, databases, 3D modeling softwares. I'm showing you Acquire here, but it's just point data. It'll go into anything. So now I'm going to flip through some images from Leapfrog so you can actually see this in a 3D model. What I'm showing you here is the point data being brought in. Here's Epidote. So this is, again, about 22 drill holes, and this is the gold skarn. So where it's red, you're actually seeing a high percentage of Epidote. So you have Epidote, carbonate, muscovite, fangitic muscovite. So you're able to look at this in 3D. So how I wanted to end the talk today is to show you some of the work we've been doing over the last couple of years with clustering and being able to automatically domain our data, and also then to do prediction of various materials. And so what I'm showing you now is how we cluster data. So you're looking about 1.5 billion points of data here. And I won't go into how this is, but this is a clustering algorithm where we are able to figure out where there are, how close the various minerals are to one another and how distant they are. And what you're looking at here is then colored by how much gold there is. So you're looking at essentially a plot of the minerals, the assemblages that go with gold. And here you can see, here's gold on the left and white mica on the right. And I'll skip to this one just so you can see that what you see by it being clustered in all over the place rather than being all together, what you're seeing is a beautiful image of what skarns do, because the gold and the copper and the zinc or whatever it is that you're looking for tend to be in these discrete skarn bodies that are all over the place rather than, say, in a porphyry where it's all in one spot. And so then we can plot that in 3D. We can do automatic clustering, so we can actually automatically identify assemblages with the assistance of geologists, of course. So then we have, here's a cluster here, amphibole, epidote, phlogopite. You can see is a beautiful correlation down here to gold. So we can automatically domain and figure out assemblages just using the point data. Here's another cluster, another one, hematite apophyllite, this one, dickite gypsum kaolinite. Again, you can see that you have really nice correlations between that and gold. So the final piece here is that we can use all of these billions of data points to actually predict logs. So we can predict downhole alteration logs at this point if we have enough data. And by enough, I mean we need about 5,000 to 6,000 meters of data of core. But once we have that, we can actually predict logs. So we have, on the far left-hand side, this is what a human has logged. And then this next two images are what has been predicted from clustering and machine learning algorithms. And then from there, we can actually pull in the gold assay, the actual gold assay. We teach the computer what gold means, what defines gold, what clusters of particular alteration minerals. And from that, we can actually start to predict gold grade. So what I'm showing you here is a logged, the human logging on the left, and then the computer on the right for both sets. The set one over here, what I was going to show you was that actually predicts very well. That was like the whole point of the talk. There you go. All right. So what that actually showed you is that at the very end, you are able to predict very well the downhole assay for gold. And we've seen it not just for gold, but for copper and all of the other elements that we've looked at. But in this case, this was the copper one. Or this was the gold one. And so the third one from the left is the actual gold assay. And then the second one from the left is the predicted gold, downhole gold assay. And this is possible with a combination of human logging and computer learning and machine learning. So we need that chief geologist or that senior geologist to help define that logging. But then once we have that, we're able to do, as you can see, a fairly good job of actually predicting grade downhole. And so where I'll end, and maybe I'll come next year and talk about this, is the final one is that now that we understand all this information about skarn, we can now go into a big greenfield project, a semi-greenfield project, which actually has all three. And this is Regionalist Resources' Antiquary project in Peru. They have an epithermal, a porphyry, and a skarn. They're trying to find the porphyry right now. It's sitting next to Buenaventura's Pantuatay, so they have a big epithermal there. And they're going to be using Corescan. They're doing about 30,000 meters of core to fully define that, that entire district. And so we'll really be putting everything that we've learned now into place in a greenfield environment. And so maybe next year I can come and report back on how that went. So thank you.